Hello and welcome to the Week 7 edition of the Power Grid. It's the Footballguys.com daily fantasy show. And I'm joined this week by Jeff Pasquino, Devin Knotts, Ryan Hester, and special guest David Dodds, co-founder of Footballguys. We've got John Lee off this week. And, don't tell John, but I think we got an upgrade this week with David Dodds joining us. David, so good to have you on the show. And I'm just going to go right into it. I want to hear what you think about Vegas and what Vegas is telling you this week.
Yeah, it's an interesting week, Austin, in that there's no game that's favored by more than 6 points. So that's kind of odd. I mean, usually you're seeing 10, 11-point games. Everything's tight. There's a lot of division matchups. So that sticks out. And then I think the biggest one, obviously, is that Sunday night game, which won't even be on the DK slate, which is the overpowering game for the week with the huge, implied totals of both those teams, 56.5 under over. But I think that's interesting because people won't be able to play it on DK. I expect possibly a lot more of those kind of plays to filter through the FanDuel site. So it's just something to consider, I think, in your GPP lineups and ownership percentages of how that's going to affect the overall balance of how you mix your lineups together.
Yeah, and if you're looking over at DraftKings main slate, only 4 teams on the main slate have over 24 implied points. So it's not really a high-scoring week for that DK main slate when you take out Atlanta and New England. Obviously, we focus on the main slates here. We don't cover Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football. We have a London game this week, but it is on the main slate. It's not an early game. It's going to be night in London, so that's the Arizona at the Rams game. Jeff, let me ask you, what do you see on Vegas? What are some of the games that intrigue you this week?
I'm actually keen on that London game, and it's notable because it's a few things. It's a night game. The Rams decided that they were not going to travel back west before they headed over across the pond. They stayed in Jacksonville after last week, and they flew over. So Arizona had a much longer flight. They went earlier, but they're both over there now. It's a night game, but it's still going to be a change of Arizona's clock. Also, it's notable because the game is in Twickenham Stadium, not in Wembley Stadium, so the grass is different there. It's a much better running surface, much better kicking surface. So I think this game could be a lot higher scoring than most London games we've seen in the past, and I'm really going to key on some of the people in that game.
Yeah, I think that's one we definitely need to talk more about when we go position by position. Devin, what else do you see here in Vegas?
The Browns are projected to score 20 points.
That's kind of unusual, isn't it?
Like that stands out to me. I mean, we'll get to quarterbacks in a little bit, but Kaiser's only 4,900. Like, how are the Browns going to move the ball? How are they? I mean, that just screams that something I wasn't aware of. In the 49ers, are also projected to score over 20 points. So that's 2-0-5 or 0-6 teams projected to score over 20 points. It's at least, and they're both values, so it's at least intriguing.
Wow. I think hashtag Never Browns may be at stake here a little bit. We'll dive into that.
Just because I say they're intriguing doesn't mean I'll be playing them, but somebody might.
Right. Somebody who's not me might decide to play them low exposure in a long shot GPP.
Sure.
Let's move right into quarterbacks here, fellas. Well, before we do, one of the other big games I feel like we'll be talking about is New Orleans at Green Bay. It feels like there's a lot of potential plays and storylines in that. And then, like Devin mentioned, the Cleveland and San Francisco matchups against Tennessee and Dallas are kind of intriguing this week, where ordinarily Cleveland and San Francisco may not be in play. So let's talk about quarterbacks. Devin, let's go back to you and talk about some quarterbacks here. Who do you like at quarterback? Are you going to be playing Deshaun Kaiser now that he's back as the starter of the Browns again?
I think on DraftKings at 4,900, he's not a bad GPP play just because he has the running ability. And like we mentioned, it's his offense. I mean, Hugh Jackson came out and said that he's the guy they're not, and who knows what to believe in Cleveland, but he's the guy temporarily for now, and it sounds like he's going to be the guy for a few more weeks. The other guy that I really like this week is Drew Brees. So Drew Brees' price has really come down, and a big part of that is because of ultimately he hasn't been the typical Drew Brees that we've seen week to week. But if you look at this Packers secondary, they've been pretty banged up lately. So Quentin Rollins is out for the season with an Achilles injury. Kevin King and Devon House are both questionable this week. It looks like they're going to play, but this is and we don't typically like to play Drew Brees on the road, but this secondary is a little bit banged up, and Green Bay actually failed to get a sack last week, and they only have 3 sacks in their last 3 games. So you give Drew Brees a lot of time, he's going to pick you apart.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. I think that's a good call. Yeah. And speaking of Green Bay, probably the biggest injury of the week regarding quarterbacks is Aaron Rodgers being out with that broken collarbone. So maybe Brett Hundley is in play this week. We've also got Tampa Bay quarterback Jameis Winston. We're keeping a close eye on him. He had a limited practice today, but it sounded like the part that didn't happen was the actual throwing of the football. So he's sounding kind of doubtful. The beat writers there are not sounding optimistic. So
was he doing the mock throwing that Cam Newton's been doing?
Yes, exactly. Air throwing is pretty awesome. Just like I'm really good at playing the air guitar. So I should get in a band. Ryan, tell me about some quarterbacks that you like. Do you have any interest in Brett Hundley this week?
Not so much in Hundley, unless I end up just really needing the money. But it's not going to be a cash play. I mean, we just don't know. We have to know in cash games, and with him, we just don't. Yeah. The guys that I'm looking more at are I really like Dak Prescott this week. I know Ezekiel Elliott is going to play, and the saga continues. But quarterbacks have done whatever they wanted against San Francisco this year. So I think Dak can have a nice game and return value. The other one I'm looking at is another guy who or another matchup where quarterbacks have kind of been able to do what they want, and that's Russell Wilson at the Giants. So it's a long trip for Seattle, of course, but it's a late game. The Giants have been bad against quarterbacks, really bad against tight ends. So I think – and we know Seattle doesn't really move the ball on the ground unless it is with Russ Wilson. So I like those 2 guys a lot, and that's kind of where I'm starting at quarterback, especially in cash.
Yeah, I think in cash I'm looking very heavily at Brees and Prescott. Oops, hold on. Devin flashed the red black-eyed Joe. What do you got, bud?
The one thing I'll say about the Giants is that against Russell Wilson is that no wideout has actually topped 70 yards against them, and they've faced Dez Bryant, Alshon Jeffrey, Golden Tate, Keenan Allen. So it's a situation where they've picked on Eli Apple quite a bit, but it's not – they actually have – been okay. So I can't buy into Russell Wilson this week with all the other values that are out there.
Yeah, he's probably 3rd on the list for me in terms of considering in terms of cash game plays there. Jeff, let's talk quarterbacks. CJ Beathard was named the starter over Brian Hoyer in San Francisco. Do you any interest in Beathard here?
I do, and I think it's more of a GPP play. I think that he forms a nice stack that I'm looking at that I'll be mentioning later, but I think there's a lot of plays that are in vogue for him and that are cheap. One quarterback I really want to mention, though, that hasn't been mentioned is Marcus Mariota. I think that he's a good pivot from some of the other guys have been mentioned. And against Cleveland, that's the way to beat Cleveland. Cleveland is not good against the pass, but they're very good against the run. And especially if we see one of the running backs out, you may be asking Mariota to carry the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen Mariota come into a game seemingly hurt and then suddenly, miraculously seem a lot better. I think he's a guy you can't ignore in GPPs. David, talk to me a little bit about Matt Ryan and Tom Brady here in the Sunday night slate, especially over on FanDuel. Do you think these guys are going to be crazy high owned in cash games on FanDuel this week?
Yeah, I think so, because I think there's a lot of values elsewhere, but I don't know if that's where the sharp money is going to be. I think Brady still comes at a giant premium price, and although you can make that money up in some other positions, I still think some of these guys you talked about, Brett Hundley, we haven't talked about Tyrod Taylor, who I think, his home and away splits are night and day. Here's a home game against Tampa Bay who can't stop anybody, so you're going to get Tyrod Taylor, 7,000 on FanDuel, 5,100 on DraftKings, very cheap. Who's he going to throw to? Maybe you don't stack him, but but I think maybe he just throws to LeSean McCoy. We all kind of probably do like when we hit running backs. So, and I think Brett Hundley, I will say one of the metrics I do for doing the projections each week is my game predictor. And admittedly, all the stats for Green Bay would be Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers would project out against this New Orleans defense at roughly 326 passing yards and 2.6 passing touchdowns. So is Hundley 70% of that, 80% of that? Because if he is, he's great value. So I think it's a situation where I actually believe what Devin sees too is the Green Bay is not going to be able to get a pass rush, plus doesn't have corners. And Brees could just go lights out, which really forces Hundley in a game script that has to throw to catch up. So I think there could be a lot of value with Hundley just in a garbage time setup where there's a lot of action in that game. So those are the guys I like. And I do like Beathard to Kittle, actually, as somebody that's a decent play at quarterback.
I'm pretty sure that's who Jeff was going to go to there on his stack. And the thing that makes me nervous about Hundley, which will keep him out of my cash lineups, is that prior to Sunday, he had completed 3 passes in 3 seasons. And unless you count the interception that he threw, that would be 4.
Dominated the preseason, Austin.
Preseason.
Dominated.
Are we talking about preseason?
Dominated the preseason. Well, I think it's a situation. I think we know Aaron Rodgers always plays, but he's been in this system for a long time. He's seen this playbook. He's seen and learned from the best there. To think that Mike McCarthy won't have him ready, I think is kind of wrong. Now,
didn't we see the same thing
good enough to block, and he just doesn't get sacked every play? That's to be determined. In fact, I would say that's one of the strongest plays. That if you want to bet against him, when some people probably will have him in cash or cash plus type lineups, then I think the answer is to go for the New Orleans Saints and really go after him at defense. But I think Hundley's going to be there. I think Hundley's going to get quite a bit of garbage time action in that game, or in just a high shootout game.
Yeah, I think he's worth a GPP play.
They don't lose many games by a lot of points in Green Bay. So admittedly, they've had good players. But
what do you think?
The one thing I'll say, and there's a lot of assumptions I've read out there this week that just because he's been in the system for a long time and he's learned under Aaron Rodgers, we said the exact same thing about Scott Tolzien and Matt Flynn. So neither one – you can't – I have an issue with just trusting this Green Bay Packers, whoever's behind. It's the Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyers of the world, that just because they study under Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers that all of a sudden they're going to become a superstar. Brett Hundley to me is not good. Like he's not a good player.
And those New England guys
one
actually
game, Devin. There was that one game, like the 6-touchdown game against Detroit.
Week 17 that kept the Lions out of the playoffs or something. Like I put no stock into whoever studies under Aaron Rodgers is going to be the next Aaron Rodgers. Like it's a significant drop off that I would rather go with someone who's known.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Ryan?
I was just going to say, even those New England examples turned into functional quarterbacks, and the Green Bay examples really haven't. So,
yeah, exactly. I think what do you got, Jeff?
Before we leave, I think we need to go back to the original point about the New England Atlanta game. I think it's only available on the FanDuel slate, so that's going to make it more highly owned. The people that want to play those guys are going to play on that slate. They're going to be more higher owned from a game theory perspective. But if you want to play that game, I think that you could play that game without playing the quarterbacks, just from a game theory differential way.
Yeah, and we should get into some of those guys at the other positions for sure. Let's make sure we don't miss that. One guy I think we should also not sleep on in GPPs is Cam Newton. He was rushing more last week, and he's put together a couple of decent games. I'm not saying that it's a great matchup for him or a cash-worthy matchup, but I think don't sleep on him in GPPs this week. Let's talk about running backs. There's a few key injuries here. Leonard Fournette seems like he's going to play, although he didn't practice on Thursday. DeMarco Murray didn't practice on Thursday. I don't think he's going to play this week. This is one to watch because Derrick Henry could get interesting this week. Robert Turbin is out with an arm injury, sent to IR, so maybe Marlon Mack is a potential salary relief guy. Bilal Powell looks like he's coming back this week. Not a big piece of news, but just don't get cute with Jets running backs because it's going to be all 3 of them. And it looks like Andre Ellington may not go this week. I don't think that means catches for Adrian Peterson, but that means just sort of avoid Ellington, and it's one less pass catcher for Carson Palmer.
That's Kerwin Williams.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
We have a new sponsor. Jeff, kick us off on some running backs.
There's a lot on this list. I think that you can pay up for your bells, or you can go down to Jerick McKinnon. I really like against the Ravens, who are just terrible. I think the game script really fits there. And you could go to the two main guys from last week that really performed, McKinnon and Ingram. I think Ingram, the game script fits well for him. That offensive line is really clicking, and that really sets up Brees. I think that you could see a lot of Ingram this week. And PPR, I like Christian McCaffrey against the Bears. I think that he's a great play on DraftKings. He had 14 targets against the Eagles. I think that's a definite option. But the guy I really want to hear for the opinion of the other guys is LeSean McCoy. I think that's the game script. I see that if Tyrod Taylor is going to throw the ball to anybody, it's probably going to be short passes to McCoy. And McCoy could have a monster game against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. So
regression.
It's touchdown regression week.
The one thing I'll say about Tampa Bay is Levante David and Quan Alexander look like they're both going to play, which is a significant upgrade for that Tampa Bay defense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ryan, tell me, who do you like at running back?
Yeah, Jeff named a couple of them. I had McCoy on my list for cash. I mean, I just do think the script will go well, and he just has so much volume. He's going to be getting – he and Melvin Gordon are the guys that have right under Le'Veon Bell and Ezekiel Elliott. Those are just the guaranteed volume guys. They're going to catch 3, 4, 5 passes. They're going to get 15-plus carries. I mean, they're worth paying for. Going further down the list, I actually did have Gordon as kind of a more sneaky, maybe even a GPP play. Against Denver, people tend to just stay away from Denver guys, but as we know, we have volume in Gordon, so always worth a shot in the lineup. Getting to the Sunday night FanDuel specific game, I like Tevin Coleman in that one as a GPP play. New England is giving up 7.2 receptions a game to running backs and 77 yards. That's the second most and the most in the NFL. And we know that Coleman has big playability out of the backfield. So he's somebody that, is worth a GPP shot, maybe even, a pivot off of another pass catcher like McCaffrey. And one thing I will finish with here is that if you are playing Mark Ingram and Jerick McKinnon, just know that there's going to be a lot of I wasn't on them last week ownership boost probably, right. Or people that had them and won money and just kind of want to run it back. So those are definitely just kind of cash plays, and then you want to maybe move elsewhere at the other positions.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is an interesting week based on recency bias. How are people going to react, and how the slate unfolds? How are people going to react? David, lay out the running back landscape as you see it.
Yeah, I think everything hinges on that DeMarco Murray news. I mean, if Derrick Henry is the guy and DeMarco Murray officially scratches, I mean, he should be 100% owned at 5,600 on FanDuel and 5,500 on DK. I mean, that's just ridiculous value. And because of that, I think that could sway everything. So again, if Ingram and these other ones are highly owned, if Gurley's highly owned, somebody like Carlos Hyde at 5,900 on DraftKings is somebody you could slot in, or a lot lower ownership percentage, very good value. So that Derrick Henry thing is also probably the news that really elevates all of your lineups and even your lineup build. So it's kind of tough. I mean, we're talking about who do you like? And it's like, well, if Derrick Henry's a go as the main guy and he slots in at 5,600, you're getting salary relief and a stud. Wow, you could build your lineups any and every different way. So I think that's the key to this whole thing. We haven't talked about Peterson, and I'm off on him, by the way, but I just thought we should talk about him. It's on paper a good matchup. I don't know how many people trust Adrian Peterson. I don't, but he might have some ownership. Just somebody I thought it was worth mentioning. But virtually all the other guys that Jeff mentioned, I also really like McKinnon a lot. And then the other thing with McKinnon you have to understand is that's a situation where Baltimore looks awful, and we haven't talked to receivers yet, but if they can't really field a receiving team, it just seems like there should be a lot of running back carries in that Baltimore game. So for a Minnesota back. So I think McKinnon, again, sure, he may have a lot of ownership, but he should have a lot of volume as well.
Yeah, Devin, you flashed up the red black-eyed Joe, I think, during the Derrick Henry talk against Cleveland here.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Derrick Henry is that the Browns actually have the best yards per attempt in the NFL so far this year at just 3.0, tied with Denver for the best in the league. So that's a concern. I think that in GPPs, you should at least take that into consideration as you're building your lineups, because ultimately he's going to be highly owned if DeMarco Murray does scratch. So know that it's not a great matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland's more susceptible against the pass. The one name I haven't heard, and continuing to just go with it at this point, is that CJ Anderson. So this Chargers, I do the rushing matchups for football guys that are sent out via our weekly email. And this is the one matchup that we have classified as great. And the one thing that we can call out is that Jay Ajayi ran for 122 yards, Kareem Hunt ran for 172, LeGarrette Blount ran for 136, and Orleans Darkwa ran for 117. So this is a Chargers run defense that's allowing 4.43 yards per attempt, and they've allowed over 110 yards in every single game this year. So don't sleep on CJ Anderson this week. He's not ever the sexy guy. He's volatile. I get it, but don't sleep on him this week.
My only concern with CJ Anderson might be, I mean, he had a pretty good matchup last week and did nothing with it, failed on his goal line carry, and it looks like they're running all those backs in there. So is CJ Anderson even going to get the volume of touches, even though that's a great situation? So the running backs as a whole could do quite well against the Chargers. I don't know that CJ Anderson is the sole beneficiary of those yards and touchdowns.
Yeah, I think if you're playing him GPP hoping for that touchdown.
I'm playing him in cash.
Whoa, bold move, Devin Knotts. I'm not there with you.
Games.
I mean, we asked the same. And David, I'm not trying to question it. It's just we asked the same question 3 weeks ago when he had Buffalo with just 8 carries, and then he came back the next week with 20 against Oakland. So
It wasn't that he just didn't have any carries. He didn't deliver. He had like 2 yards per rush last week in a situation that was hugely positive, all the while Jamal Charles keeps ripping off long runs. I mean, I think the fact that they're using even the 3rd and 4th running back on that team tells me CJ Anderson's in the doghouse over there. We'll see it. Until I see it on volume, I don't believe it.
I understand that argument.
Jeff, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I think that when you're picking a cash game running back, you want to pick a guy that's script independent. And I see scripts that can come out where CJ Anderson's just not going to be part of the game. If Denver falls behind, he's just not involved. And that's what happened last week. His snaps were only 38, down from 56 to 49 to 44 to 38 over the last 4 games. So snaps keep going down, touches keep going up for Booker and Charles. There are scenarios, if the Chargers get out in front, you're dead. So I would not use C.J. Anderson just for that very reason.
Yeah, it's a little sticky. Going back to a couple other players we just talked about, I like Derrick Henry more on FanDuel than I do on DK. Over on DK, I feel like I've got other options in Carlos Hyde around the same price. Also, Jerick McKinnon isn't that much more than Henry, but I think over on FanDuel he makes a nicer play. Also, he doesn't catch a ton of passes, so FanDuel's where I've got my eye on him. Adrian Peterson. Kind of similar reasons. I don't like him on DK. I might play him in GPPs on FanDuel because I feel like the price is decent over there. And I'm fading Orleans Darkwa. Don't get cute and think that Orleans Darkwa is interesting this week just because he puts together a couple of interesting games. Devin,
you guys laughed at me when I mentioned him several weeks ago.
It's true. We did laugh at you.
We still laugh at you.
And you're laughing at me about CJ Anderson. I get it. Let's just keep. Run. He had 117 yards. It's a lot more than 1 run.
It was a great game against a team that hadn't given up more than, I think, 40 or 50 to LeSean McCoy, Melvin Gordon. So it was a great game last week for him.
Yeah. And I think Ezekiel Elliott has a great matchup here, but his price is pretty high, and I'm having trouble fitting him into my cash lineups, but I can probably find a way to get him into some GPPs at that high price. I love the matchup. I'm just having trouble getting him in with all the
Ray Armstrong's also questionable in that game, so he's the replacement for Navarro Bowman, or he's one of the reasons they got rid of Navarro Bowman, Bowman's a run stopper. So if Armstrong's out, that linebacker core becomes pretty depleted pretty quick.
Yep, exactly. That's part of the reason I like him over there. Let's move on to receivers, where it's like the walking wounded. Tons of injuries at receiver. We already mentioned it. Baltimore is kind of out of pass catchers. They're missing Jeremy Maclin was in a non-contact jersey today. Brashad Perriman didn't practice. Mike Wallace didn't practice. Ben Watson, their tight end, didn't practice. So lock and load that Minnesota defense and stay away from the Ravens. Let's see. Buffalo's also not looking so great. Doesn't look like Jordan Matthews is going to make his comeback this week. It's still a little iffy, but he got a limited practice today, but it did not sound great. And then Charles Clay is obviously out with the knee injury. Some of the bigger names at the top of the list, Emmanuel Sanders is out, so maybe we're looking at cash relief with Benny Fowler. Stephon Diggs didn't practice Thursday, nor did Michael Floyd, so Minnesota's hurting for receivers. Kelvin Benjamin didn't practice today, and so maybe Devin Funchess is in play. Devontae Parker didn't practice Thursday. Sounds like he may miss the game. But, hey, Sterling Shepard looks like he might come back this week, so great.
So there's that.
There's that. And also Marquise Lee is another guy I've got my eye on in terms of maybe finding some cheap Jacksonville receiver to bank on. All right, that's a lot of crazy injuries. Ryan, I want to hear any of these guys affected by these injuries intrigue you?
Alan Hearns does. Indy's not very good, and so I'll take a guy that is probably going to get, I don't know, at least 8 targets, maybe more, assuming Marquise Lee is out. So that would be one that would be the injury pivot. Also, Demaryius Thomas is still super cheap for a guy of his pedigree that should also see at least 8 targets with Emmanuel Sanders out. So the volume there is going to be nice. I'd rather play him than Benny Fowler. Casey Hayward notwithstanding there for the Chargers. So those are the two guys, in terms of the kind of injury waterfall that I'd look after. Outside of those guys, you can kind of play the hits at receiver this week. Antonio Brown is on fire and back at home, so I like him. I'm trying to find ways to get him in. Oh, and then one more, I guess, injury cascade. Adam Thielen is getting a ton of targets and should continue to. So Baltimore's pass defense is good on paper, but Thielen's going to get a lot of volume, and that Baltimore team, who knows if they just, this might be a little narrative streety, but they might just kind of pack it in if they're getting killed in the game. So, I'm looking at volume, I guess, is the theme of the week.
And I think that if that Ravens secondary has a weakness, it's in the slot coverage, and so Thielen should have a little bit easier time than typically the outside receivers would. David, you flashed up your red black-eyed Joe talking about Denver receivers. It sounds like you like Benny Fowler.
Yeah, I do. I mean, you've got Casey Hayward's going to lock down Demaryius. So there's no doubt he'll probably still get targets in that situation, but I think Fowler's got, 4,500 at FanDuel, too cheap to – and they probably have an equal chance to score if Casey Hayward is locked down on the better receiver. So to me, I'll take the much cheaper guy every time. So I think Demaryius is just one of those kind of trap kind of plays. And I think so much is depending on injuries this week. I mean, if Kelvin Benjamin scratches, are we going to not have Devin Funchess in our lineups? I mean, so it just seems like there's all these cheap guys. And again, if Marcus Lee scratches, is Alan Hearns not in our lineups? It just seems like a given that one or two of these situations catapults these guys in, and all of a sudden, we flip everything. We're paying up a running back, we're possibly paying up a tight end, paying up a quarterback, and all of these potential values we're talking about all go out the window because you can get cheap wide receivers they'll do good enough with minimal risk because the targets will be there.
Yeah, Devin Funchess would be in an interesting situation, although I don't find his salary to be especially low this week. He's $6,700 at FanDuel and $6,000 at DK. I'm not saying I won't have exposure to him, but he's not a guy that I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's like amazing time for Funchess.
Right.
But it's a good
And
situation.
he's not particularly good at football.
Hashtag.
It's a new hashtag. No, not particularly good at football.
His one good game was against the Patriots, so I throw that out the window.
Yeah.
Well, he's playing Chicago though. So.
Chicago's pass defense has been okay.
Yeah. Jeff, talk to me about some receivers.
I'm looking more in the middle range so I can try and find somebody that's a little bit higher caliber receiver than the Fowlers who might be in a different role. I do like the Jacksonville call, but I'm looking at Rashard Matthews pretty strongly. He's the top value guy for FanDuel on our IVC. That's how you beat Cleveland. He sees a ton of targets. I also like Pierre Garçon. I think that he's going to see a lot of targets, and I like that mixing him in, and that's kind of builds my San Francisco stack, especially on DraftKings. He's a little bit more pricey there, but the volume, if you take away the 2 games where he's had the worst matchup, and I know it's cherry picking, but he's had 9 to 11 targets in all other 4 contests. So I really like those 2 guys, and that's what I'm looking for in the middle. But I think value is going to emerge this weekend as we see guys scratch, and I'm probably going to wind up at the top end paying up for wide receivers like AJ Green, who was a fantastic matchup this week.
Yeah, there's a lot of these guys that you can consider. Devin, what do we do with Green Bay? Do we just avoid their receivers in this game? They drop the salaries on these guys knowing kind of that, Aaron Rodgers is going to be out. Does that make them enough of a value to consider them in GPPs?
I think I don't like Jordy Nelson. I like Devontae Adams if I'm going to take one. He had 10 targets last week. We've seen when Rodgers goes out that Jordy just doesn't perform, and we've seen this story before. So Hundley doesn't necessarily scream off the page to me as a guy who's going to throw it deep to Jordy. I think he's going to be looking primarily at Adams over the slot position. I think it's been mentioned, but this week I'm just trying to find a way to fit Antonio Brown in. I mean, if we've learned a lesson, and I think we said it on our show last week, it's start him every week. And ultimately, I failed to do that this year. I've done it the past couple of weeks, and it's been okay. But he's the most consistent guy by far. We've talked about Julio Jones in great matchups, and I don't want to get too into it, but Julio Jones is really struggling. And it's not just this year. It's been over the past 2 years where he's not finding the end zone. I think we've touched on a lot of these guys, but I have to mention one really sneaky play that I guarantee that 99% of our listeners have not heard of, and maybe you guys haven't either. But if Baltimore has all the issues that they have on at their wide receiver spot, don't sleep on Chris Moore. So Chris Moore's a speedster from Cincinnati who junior college transfer kid who absolutely has deep speed. So he burned Marshawn Lattimore and Gary and Conley in college. That's the type of caliber deep threat that he can be. So don't sleep on Chris Moore if all 3 of those receivers are out. He had 34 snaps last week. They're going to have to throw to somebody, and at minimum price, he's a guy that is a deep GPP dart.
I like those cheap darts. I like Michael Thomas in cash against that Green Bay secondary. And if I'm looking at a receiver in that Sunday night game for GPPs on FanDuel, I'm actually targeting Danny Amendola in the slot there versus Brian Poole. It's a great matchup for Amendola. Julio Jones, I will not be having much exposure to this week. Let's talk about tight. Oh, yeah, what do you got?
Before we move on,
yeah.
one guy we didn't mention, and in case anybody needs a value, just in case these scratches don't come in, is Robert Woods. So he's seen I think it's 6, 7, 8, and 7, something between 6 and 8 targets for 4 straight weeks. So not exactly sure how much Patrick Peterson he would see, but Arizona has been okay. Jeff's telling me 0, so even if it's less than half, he's the guy that is seeing the most targets. And receivers that are not against Patrick Peterson have been absolutely destroying Arizona, and quarterbacks have destroyed Arizona all year. So he's another guy, cheap volume that we should just not move on until we at least mention.
I'll second that, Ryan, because he's got the best cornerback matchup. He's not going to see Peterson or Matthew, so I think he's got the best. I think he's going to be in the slot, and he can get deep on that speedy turf. I think he's a great play.
Yeah, you'll probably see mostly Justin Bethel while Sammy Watkins is locked up by Patrick Peterson. So, John Lee was also trying to talk up Robert Woods on last night's Roto-Grinders Football Guys show. I'm having a little trouble buying into Robert Woods, but the matchup is great.
Just one clarification. The Cardinals did send down or basically demote Justin Bethel, so Tremont Williams will be playing there.
Oh, good call.
Which I know John Lee sent me a message today that he was disappointed about because Justin Bethel has been absolutely terrible.
He has.
Good note there. All right, let's talk tight ends. There's a lot of tight ends here kind of in the mid-range. The top-end tight ends aren't super available. I mean, you've got, one of them's Monday Night Football, one of them's Thursday Night Football. You've got Gronkowski on Sunday Night Football, not available on the DK main slate. So we're mostly hunting for guys in the middle, but there's also a couple of values here. Really, the only injuries we're looking at here are Charles Clay is out. So, if you're looking for Nick O'Leary as a GPP dart, he's there for you.
I actually laugh. I kind of like that dart. It's one that should be 1% owned.
I mean, he had a decent game last week.
It's not a bad dart.
He's a min price on DK,
Yeah.
I guess. All right. Let's, Jeff, tell me about some tight ends you like.
There's a lot this week, and I can see in cash, if you're looking to save some money on DraftKings, you can go 2 tight end cash. I think that's a viable strategy this week. I think Jack Doyle is probably a guy that's not going to be mentioned much, but he's a great GPP play against Jacksonville, which is a tough perimeter defense, but they're going to be susceptible over the middle, and Doyle's seeing a lot of targets. I like Hunter Henry because, again, Denver is susceptible over the middle. I like Safarian Jenkins. I think he's going to have – he's been showing well. Should have had 2 touchdowns last week. Kyle Rudolph against Baltimore can't stop tight ends. Jimmy Graham against the Giants can't stop tight ends. And Delanie Walker against Cleveland. So there are a lot out there. And we haven't even mentioned George Kittle, whose college roommate – that was the whole Joe Flacco to Dennis Pitta. Yes, I worked Dennis Pitta back into the show. But the roommates things is a real thing. I think that Kittle could find the end zone again. All these guys have 5-6 catches with 50, 70 yards and a touchdown upside. So it's a matter of picking out the spots, but there's a lot of great spots in that mid-range. Yeah,
I like the idea of going 2 tight ends on DK this week. I think people are going to be looking hard at that, both in GPP and in cash. You named pretty much every guy on my list. Ryan, can you hone us in on either a guy that you like outside of this list or maybe your top 2 cash plays from this list of guys?
Yeah, Evan Engram wasn't mentioned, and we know he's going to get a lot of volume even if Sterling Shepard does come back. So he's somebody that I would also look at. But just to build on the Delanie Walker, he was actually added to the injury report today, so it's something to keep an eye on. But if he's playing, he was kind of my football guys picture there at the top of my article this week. Just a couple interesting Cleveland tight end stats is that Tennessee targets the tight end on 30% of their pass attempts, and tight ends against Cleveland are targeted on 30% of their pass attempts. So that's some nice little parallel. And when you have a guy like Walker, who is a heavily targeted tight end to begin with, regardless of opponent, I really like that a lot. But outside of those guys, even more than the roommate narrative street is George Kittle almost scored twice on the same drive last week and did score and tear up Indy the week before. So he seems to be a player on the rise anyway. So those are kind of my top guys there too.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Devin, tight end.
Yeah, I think one guy that hasn't been mentioned is Tyler Higbee. So last week he disappointed against Jacksonville pretty drastically. So I think a lot of people are going to be off of him, but he's really cheap. And one of the things that we've seen is that whether it's Gerald Everett or Tyler Higbee, one of those two typically has a pretty good game for the Rams. And Higbee in his 2 games prior to last week had 98 yards and 47 yards. So he's only 2,700 on DraftKings. The one thing I will say about Delanie Walker is Jamie Collins is back, and he was back last week. And there was a lot of hype about Ryan Griffin and whether or not we were going to jump in just because of a great matchup. Ryan Griffin had 8 targets, but he only caught 3 balls. He did have 52 yards, but this Browns defense isn't as terrible as what they've been. They're still not great. Jamie Collins is a pretty good coverage linebacker. So that's the only piece that I worry about with Delanie Walker, especially with how popular he's going to be.
Yeah, I'm having trouble fitting Delanie Walker into my DraftKings lineups because you have to pay a pretty good step up from these other guys that I like. But over on FanDuel, I think he's more in play because he's kind of in the same range with some of these other guys that we.
I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end lineups on DraftKings this week using Walker as a receiver in the flex.
Interesting, because I could see going like Henry Doyle or like Henry Rudolph. Some combination of like Henry, Rudolph, and Doyle are some of the kind of cheaper guys that I'm liking, kind of squeezing in 2 tight end spots over there. Also on the Sunday Night Football slate over on FanDuel, don't sleep on Austin Hooper against New England. It's going to be a high-scoring game.
Just one note there, Mohamed Sanu should be back. In games that Sanu started and finished, Hooper had 2 targets.
But his name is Austin, so Austin has to mention him.
I'm contractually obligated to mention as many Austins as possible. Austin Safarian-Jenkins. All right, let's talk about defenses and kickers. Hey, there's an injury note here. Oh, no, it's not an injury. It's just that Jason Myers sucks. Josh Lambo is the new kicker there in Jacksonville, so don't get cute and start Jason Myers. Let's talk about defenses and kickers. Who'd like to talk about defenses and kickers? Let me see those black-eyed Joes. I don't have John to automatically flash up a red sign. So we'll get David and Jeff to walk us through defenses and kickers here a little bit. David, what do you see?
Yeah, I think the lockdown is Minnesota. It's going to be highly owned, but it's probably your cash game play. Again, Baltimore has no receivers. Flacco's looked erratic all season. This is at home. This is just a situation that begs, for bad things to happen to Baltimore, and I sense they're going to happen.
Yeah,
so
Minnesota.
I'll leave the rest of the field to Jeff, but I think Minnesota's the lock on most cash games and probably be highly owned.
Yep, completely agree. Jeff, tell us about maybe GPP defense and some kickers.
Yeah, I think the defense, two things. One thing I want to mention first is that you need to keep an eye. It's starting to be that time of year we need to watch the weather. So London's always possibility for weather, for rain, but we're also looking, I think, Green Bay and Chicago may be seeing some rain. So that could impact the quarterbacks, which only leads to the defense against Green Bay, which is the Saints, as being a very good GPP play. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, they got 3 touchdowns. That's how they scored so many points. Take those touchdowns away. In the last 3 weeks, they have 9 turnovers, they have 13 sacks, and they've given up a grand total of 39 points. So the Saints defense is really coming around, and they're not the week 1 or 2 pushover that everybody thought they were. They were a great option, and they are $200 cheaper on FanDuel than Minnesota, which is going to be your cash play. The other 2 that I like are Buffalo and Seattle. They're much pricier, but now I'm going to switch over to kickers, and there is an injury note. Matt Bryant's back again is a concern. It flared up today, and he's iffy. So you got to watch out for that. All the kickers that are in good, favorable situations are expensive, except for one, which is my guy, which is Ryan Suckup. And Ryan Suckup against Cleveland, that's your guy. Plug him in. He has 51 consecutive kicks under 50 yards connected from field goals. Don't even think about it. Just put Suckup in your lineup and move on.
Yep, that's who I have in my cash lineup as well. But
I have another defense that has to be mentioned.
Okay, let Devin hit defense, and I got a kicker.
Okay, Devin, tell me about defense.
Chicago Bears. So the Bears are 7th in sacks in the NFL this year. Cam Newton likes to turn the ball over. And the Panthers are actually giving up a lot of sacks. So they've given up 17 sacks this year. Cam Newton gave up 3 interceptions last year. Last week. The Bears are only 2,200 on DraftKings. They scored a touchdown last week, which I know is highly, highly unpredictable, but at the same time, they looked like a defense that is actually better than a $2,200 price tag.
I wouldn't say that Cam Newton likes to throw interceptions, but
he has a tendency to throw interceptions. How about that?
Sure. David, you had a kicker you want to mention.
I got one more defense too that's being overlooked, and that's the LA Rams. So again, weird things happen in London, but you also have a situation where, according to the metric that we normalize, sack metric, they're 1.01 sacks above league average. The Rams are. And Arizona gives up 1.47 sacks above league average. Add those 2 things together, and you come up with a projected 4.95 sacks on Carson Palmer. There's going to be a lot of heat. Again, could be a situation where everybody's body clocks aren't right. An old Carson Palmer could not only get sacked, he could turn over the ball. So I think the LA Rams, and that pairs up nicely if people are thinking, Gurley is a strong cash game play as well. So that's a defense I like. And then a kicker, I am going to keep plugging and playing against San Francisco. They've allowed 71 FanDuel points in 6 games. So you add it up, I'm going to ride that every week until it proves me wrong. That's Dan Bailey this week.
Yeah, Bailey is a strong play. Just a smidge more expensive, but he is a strong play this week. And I apologize to Jason Myers. He could kick a lot better than I can, even though he got cut from an NFL. Let's talk about some stacks. Ryan, tell me about a stack or two you like this week.
Yeah, we kind of talked about it a little bit in tight ends, but I like Russell Wilson and Jimmy Graham. Just a couple more about, where targets go sort of stats. Giants have given up 7 touchdowns to tight ends in 6 games, and their tight ends are targeted over 26% of the time against them. So that's, I think, 5th most off the, what my notes show here. So we know that Seattle's going to have to score points. Again, I kind of said this earlier in the show. They're not going to do it via the run. And to Devin's point, receivers haven't accumulated a ton of yardage against the Giants so far. We know Jimmy Graham is a super talented player, and he has a great matchup. So sign me up for that when I can get it. In addition, a running back defense stack I like is Le'Veon Bell and the Steelers. Cincinnati's offensive line woes were illustrated pretty early in the year. That narrative has kind of gone away with the Bill Lazor change, and they've done better on offense, but it still is a line that lacks talent, and the Steelers really like to get after the passer, and they'll be at home as well. So that's something that could be a nice correlation play there too.
That's interesting. Yeah, we didn't mention Joe Mixon on the other side of the ball there. Pittsburgh has been getting kind of gashed by running backs. That might be a sneaky GPP play. His price isn't all that high. Devin, talk to me about some stacks. No, you hate the Mixon.
No,
that's the Dez Bryant side.
Oh, that's the Dez Bryant.
Yeah.
That is the X for Dez Bryant.
Bryant. Love it.
Dak Prescott and Dez Bryant. So we've talked, I think I've mentioned it on the past couple of weeks about how bad the 49ers secondary has been. They're allowing 262 yards per game, which is 27th in the NFL. Dez hasn't been great, so his completion percentage is down to 62% compared to 66% last year. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's actually pretty significant. But I think he gets right this week. And Rashard Robinson, Dante Johnson, and Kwan Williams probably are 3 of probably the worst combination of corners in football. The other sneaky stack in this game is Elliott and Prescott. So Todd Gurley and Chris Thompson both went over 100 yards in their games against the 49ers from the running back position. Elliott doesn't catch a ton of balls, but he has the ability to break a big one, as Gurley and Thompson both did.
Yeah, I like those calls. David, what stacks do you like this week?
Again, I play a lot of cash plus lineups, so I will have 10 to 12 different lineups. I like to play some bizarre combinations, and people look at those as crazy, but it allows you to fit in a lot of other guys that maybe aren't as well owned in 100-man contests that have great situations. Some that I'm leaning towards, I love Bortles and Hearns. Again, if Hearns draws the start and Marcus Lee scratches, you get Hearns super cheap. Indianapolis I have is the 2nd worst in terms of pass pressure on a team. So maybe this is the game that Jacksonville's Bortles actually has enough time to throw the ball, get it to Hearns. I like Tyrod and LeSean McCoy. Again, I think a lot of people will be playing LeSean McCoy in cash games, but in a 100-man contest, I don't see people playing both of those players. So you take advantage of a Tampa Bay team that's giving them a lot of points, a lot of yards. You have both of those. Both of those are cash game possible plays, but stacking them, I think, just gives you some diversity of lineup there as well. And then I love the Dez call. I think that's a good one. I'm actually leaning. I'll have some exposure, and you guys are laughing, but I will have some exposure to Tyrod O'Leary combination, the tight end. And basically he had, since Charles Clay went down, he had 5 catches for 54 yards and limited action in that game. They're going to use it. That is what their design plays are, is the Charles Clay. They're going to run the same package against a bad Tampa Bay team that I think will do well. So, again, he'll be somebody who's 1% owned, maybe less in a lot of slates. And I think if that connects, you've got 2 super valuable plays, super cheap, and you've got the rest of you guys. You've got Le'Veon Bell, you've got Antonio Brown in your lineup easily to have major differentiation and have a bunch of stars in your lineup.
I'll buy you guys dinner if you know who Nick O'Leary's grandfather is.
Jack Nicklaus.
Correct. Random facts of the day.
Awesome. So those are the ones I'm mostly lining up for.
Nice. Jeff, wrap up our stacks here.
You know, I can laugh at David because I throw out crazy ones too, but he's absolutely right. If you can come up with a narrative for 2 or 3 guys and build around that with core guys that all make sense, if that one narrative hits, Cam Newton, it works out. I mean, these narratives do work. So the crazy narratives I'm looking at, I've got a couple. I got Todd Gurley and the Rams defense on DraftKings. I'm saying, yes, the Rams defense is very cheap this week. I'm sorry, the Chargers defense. I messed that up. But I also like Cincinnati stack. I think that you can go A.J. Green. I think that the narrative there is that the Bengals are going to have to throw a lot against Pittsburgh. A.J. Green has a huge history against Pittsburgh of doing well. And then throw another guy in with that. Either you could throw in Joe Mixon, who catches a lot of the passes out of the backfield, or even Croft, the tight end, who's going to be off the radar entirely with all these other tight ends that are out there. Pittsburgh's terrible against tight ends, and Croft had 2 touchdowns a couple weeks ago. So there's a guy, it's a very reasonable, plausible explanation for him. I also like the San Francisco combination where you take the quarterback, you take Carlos Hyde, you got the Kittle, and you got Pierre Garçon. Pick 2. And you can work out the details around that. But that's going to be a very low-owned stack. It's probably cheap enough you can get all 3 in there and just really game theory it. And stack Dallas on the other side. I think that could be a sneaky shootout option this week.
Don't triple stack the 49ers.
I mean,
at least they're cheap.
Score, what, 20 points?
Don't do it.
I can't imagine that's
fine.
20.
I'm fine with 2. Do not go with 3.
Yeah,
I thought
I'm stacking them, it's Kittle. If I'm stacking,
I will say this. I have heard that they're trying to get the ball in Hyde's hands because they might be looking to trade him.
I've also heard they're trying to score more points, but that's not happening either. So,
excellent point. Let's move on to parting thoughts. We're going to go through parting thoughts pretty quickly here because we just got so much to talk about this week. Let's go around the horn here. Devin, continue here with some parting thoughts.
I think I've said a lot of it, but the one player that I didn't get to mention is Demaryius Thomas. So Emmanuel Sanders is out this week. Casey Hayward's actually looked pretty – he's going to scare a lot of people off, but he's actually looked not great over the past couple of weeks. So he's given up a couple touchdowns. So don't sleep on Demaryius this week.
Yep, I think that people are very divided on this matchup, and some people are going all in on Thomas. Ryan, parting thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like to thank David for filling in for us. Great to have you on. So we appreciate you joining us and giving us some knowledge there. And Devin, I'm excited for my dinner whenever we can meet up. whenever we can be in the same city.
I love it. Jeff, parting thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is a great week to think about game theory. I think that especially on FanDuel, where you get the Atlanta New England game, it is going to be high scoring. But if you take the running back aspects, you take a James White, you take Freeman or Coleman instead of the passing game, you're going to set yourself apart if those guys find the end zone and do well, because then the passing game that everybody's going to be targeting is not going to do well, and you're going to be that much higher in your GPPs.
Yep. David, thank you for joining us this week.
Yeah, always.
Off here.
Yeah, always. My parting thoughts are don't spend – I mean, you could be looking at over all these matchups, but I wouldn't, have 50 rosters already for the FanDuel Million today, because I think so many of these lineups are going to be juggled Sunday morning or maybe Saturday night as we get a lot more clarity on injuries. So this looks to be the worst injury week we've seen in a long time, where major differences can happen on who to play. So just be careful, keep watching these situations, but build your lineups probably late Saturday night to go, or else you're going to be hurt by the people that get in, the Allen Hearns are real cheap and fit a lot of other stars around it.
This is the week to sort of wait until the last minute if you can, or be very prepared to be improvisational as those actives and inactives come out on Sunday morning. Completely agree. So be sure to check out all of our daily fantasy content over at footballguys.com/DFS. We've got the Football Guys Insider Pro Plus subscription that's $45. Includes all the content on the site for the entire season. That includes season-long Dynasty, IDP, and DFS. And we really appreciate having David Dodds on the show this week. Thank you so much for joining us. So on behalf of Devin Knotts and Ryan Hester and Jeff Pasquino and David Dodds, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out all of our DFS content over at footballguys.com, click on the icon in front of Ryan's face. To subscribe to our Football Guys TV YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click below me now.